Madrid, November 1st, 1700. The air in the Royal Alcazar Palace is thick with anticipation. In a dimly lit chamber, King Charles II of Spain lies on his deathbed, his frail hands clutching a sealed document that would reshape the future of Europe. The last Habsburg king of Spain, physically depleted and without an heir, had made his final decision, one that would ignite a conflict spanning continents. The document in his trembling hands was more than just a will. It was a powder keg that would explode into the War of Spanish Succession. As courtiers and diplomats anxiously waited outside his chambers, Charles II's decision would set in motion a chain of events that would redraw the map of Europe and change the balance of power forever. What could be so significant about this single piece of parchment? Within its sealed pages lay the answer to Europe's most pressing question. Who would inherit the vast Spanish Empire, a dominion where, as the saying went, the sun never set? This wasn't merely about the Spanish throne. It was about control over vast territories spanning from the Americas to the Philippines, from the Low Countries to the Mediterranean. Get ready to witness how one royal signature plunged Europe into 13 years of devastating warfare. This isn't just another historical tale. This is the story of how personal decisions at the highest level of power can transform the fate of nations. In this episode, we'll uncover the hidden machinations, secret alliances, and dramatic turning points that your history books only glimpse at. Want to discover the real story behind one of history's most consequential moments? Hit that bell icon now, like this video, and subscribe to Modern Age Chronicles. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next in this incredible saga of power, ambition, and the fight for an empire. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the consequences would echo through centuries. Are you ready to uncover the truth behind the decision that changed Europe forever? Let's dive into this fascinating chapter of history together, where one man's last will and testament became the catalyst for a war that would reshape the modern world. In the twilight years of the 17th century, the Spanish court witnessed the tragic spectacle of their king, Charles II, struggling through his final days. Known throughout Europe as the Bewitched, Charles was the living embodiment of Habsburg decline. His appearance alone told the story of generations of inbreeding, an elongated face dominated by the characteristic Habsburg jaw, so pronounced that he could barely chew his food. His tongue was so large that he struggled to speak clearly, and his physical and mental development had been severely impaired from birth. The once mighty Spanish Habsburg dynasty, which had ruled over vast territories for 2 centuries, had culminated in this frail figure. Charles II's physical condition was a stark metaphor for the Spanish Empire itself. Once powerful and feared, now weakened and struggling to maintain its grip on its territories. The king had endured multiple exorcisms throughout his life, as his frequent illnesses and disabilities led many to believe he was cursed or possessed. Despite being married twice, Charles II failed to produce an heir, a crisis that loomed over Spanish politics for decades. As his health deteriorated in 1700, the question of succession became the most pressing issue in European politics. The Spanish Empire, though declining, still controlled vast territories across Europe and the Americas. The stakes were enormous. Whoever inherited the Spanish throne would dramatically alter the balance of power in Europe. In his final months, Charles II retreated to his chambers in the Royal Alcazar of Madrid, where he worked secretly with his advisors on his last will and testament. This document would become one of the most consequential in European history. The king was torn between 2 main choices: Philip, Duke of Anjou, grandson of Louis XIV of France, and Archduke Charles of Austria, son of Emperor Leopold I. Each choice carried immense implications for the future of Europe. The tension in European courts was palpable. Ambassadors sent frantic dispatches to their capitals, reporting every whisper and rumor from Madrid. In Vienna, the Habsburg relatives of Charles II waited anxiously, confident in their dynastic claims. In Versailles, Louis XIV orchestrated a sophisticated diplomatic campaign to secure the inheritance for his grandson. In London and The Hague, leaders watched with growing concern, fearing the potential consolidation of French power if a Bourbon prince inherited the Spanish throne. The atmosphere in Madrid was equally charged. Spanish nobles split into pro-French and pro-Austrian factions, each maneuvering to influence the king's final decision. The Queen, Maria Anna of Neuburg, lobbied intensely for the Austrian candidate, while other influential figures, including Cardinal Portocarrero, argued that only a French prince could prevent the dismemberment of the Spanish Empire. As Charles II's health worsened in the autumn of 1700, the document that would ignite a European war was finally completed. The king, despite his physical and mental limitations, understood the gravity of his decision. The testament was sealed and kept under the strictest secrecy, its contents known only to a handful of trusted advisors. European courts held their breath, knowing that the death of Charles II would reveal a decision that would reshape the continent's future. On November 1, 1700, Charles II drew his last breath, and the sealed testament was opened. The contents would send shockwaves through every royal court in Europe and set the stage for one of the most significant conflicts of the 18th century. The last Habsburg king of Spain had made his choice, but the consequences of that choice would be decided on the battlefields of Europe. The succession crisis of the Spanish Empire centered around two main claimants, each representing powerful dynastic interests that would reshape European politics. Philip, Duke of Anjou, was the second grandson of Louis XIV, the Sun King of France. At 17 years old, Philip embodied French ambitions and the possibility of a Bourbon dynasty controlling both France and Spain. Coached from birth in the arts of governance at Versailles, he represented the French model of absolute monarchy. Despite his youth, he had been carefully groomed for leadership, though some questioned whether he possessed the strength of character to rule independently of his grandfather's influence. On the other side stood Archduke Charles of Austria, the second son of Emperor Leopold I. The Habsburg candidate was 16 years old and represented the continuation of Habsburg rule in Spain, which had lasted for 2 centuries. Charles combined Austrian determination with Spanish royal blood through his grandmother, Maria Anna of Spain. The Archduke's claim was strengthened by the Habsburg tradition of keeping the Spanish throne within their family, and many saw him as the natural heir to continue the dynasty's legacy. The European powers viewed the succession crisis through the lens of their own interests. England, ruled by William III, feared the potential union of French and Spanish crowns, which would create an unprecedented concentration of power. The English were particularly concerned about trade routes and colonial possessions in the Americas and the Mediterranean. Their growing naval power made them a crucial player in any future conflict. The Dutch Republic shared England's concerns, fearing French expansion and the threat to their commercial interests. They had fought several wars against Louis XIV and were determined to prevent French dominance of the Spanish Netherlands, which served as a crucial buffer zone for their territory. Portugal, initially neutral, watched nervously as events unfolded, knowing its independence might be threatened if Spain fell under French influence. The Portuguese court would play a delicate diplomatic game, eventually joining the anti-French alliance in exchange for territorial and commercial guarantees. In the German states, various princes aligned themselves based on regional interests and promises of territorial gains. The Elector of Bavaria, Maximilian Emanuel, sided with France, hoping to secure advantages for his dynasty. Other German states, particularly Brandenburg-Prussia, saw an opportunity to assert their growing influence within the Holy Roman Empire. Behind the scenes, a web of secret diplomatic negotiations unfolded. Louis XIV's diplomats worked tirelessly to secure support for the French candidate, making promises of trade concessions and territorial adjustments. The Habsburg diplomats countered with their own offers, emphasizing the threat of French hegemony and the importance of maintaining the European balance of power. In a fascinating historical note that illuminates the complexity of Habsburg dynastic politics, Charles II's family tree revealed the severe consequences of generations of inbreeding. While most people have 32 great-great-great-grandparents, Charles II had only 10, and his parents were uncle and niece. This extreme inbreeding contributed not only to his physical and mental disabilities, but also to the very crisis that now threatened to tear Europe apart. The diplomatic chessboard became increasingly complex as powers formed provisional alliances. England and the Dutch Republic signed the First Partition Treaty in 1698, attempting to prevent war by dividing the Spanish inheritance. However, this agreement, like many others, would prove insufficient to prevent the coming conflict. The Spanish court itself was divided, with various factions supporting different candidates and working to influence the king's final decision. Louis XIV engaged in a dangerous diplomatic dance, simultaneously negotiating partition treaties while positioning his grandson as the sole heir. His actions during this period would later be scrutinized by historians as either masterful statecraft or dangerous overreach. Meanwhile, Emperor Leopold I remained confident in Habsburg rights to the throne, perhaps underestimating the extent to which other European powers would resist another Habsburg domination of Spain. As tensions mounted, military preparations began in secret. Armies were mobilized, supplies stockpiled, and alliances tested. The pieces were being positioned on the European chessboard for what would become one of the most significant conflicts of the 18th century, a war that would redraw the map of Europe and establish new principles of international relations that would endure for centuries. The tension in the council chamber was electric on November 1, 1700, as Spanish officials broke the seal on Charles II's last will and testament. The document's contents would ignite a powder keg that had been building for decades. Against all expectations and previous partition treaties, Charles II had named Philip, Duke of Anjou, as the sole heir to the entire Spanish Empire. The condition was clear: the Spanish and French crowns must never be united. If Philip refused, the inheritance would pass to Archduke Charles of Austria. When the news reached Versailles, Louis XIV faced what many historians consider the most momentous decision of his long reign. The Sun King gathered his closest advisors in his private chambers. Before him lay two paths: honor the previous partition treaties with England and the Dutch Republic, or accept the will and risk war by claiming the entire Spanish inheritance for his grandson. After 3 days of intense deliberation, Louis XIV made his famous declaration to Philip: "My son, there are no longer any Pyrenees." The French king's decision to accept the will was followed by a series of provocative actions that would prove fatal to peace in Europe. In a move that shocked diplomatic circles, Louis XIV maintained Philip's rights to the French throne, despite explicitly promising not to do so. Then, in February 1701, he sent French troops to occupy the Spanish Netherlands barrier fortresses, effectively ejecting Dutch garrisons. These actions confirmed the worst fears of other European powers about French ambitions. The response was swift and decisive. William III of England, despite failing health, worked tirelessly to forge what would become the Grand Alliance. On September 7, 1701, the Treaty of The Hague was signed by England, the Dutch Republic, and the Holy Roman Empire. They were soon joined by most German princes, Portugal, and Savoy. The alliance's declared aims were to prevent the union of French and Spanish crowns, secure the Spanish Netherlands as a barrier against France, and ensure English and Dutch trading rights in Spanish America. Louis XIV's subsequent actions only strengthened the alliance's resolve. In September 1701, he dealt another blow to peace prospects by recognizing James Stuart, the Catholic Old Pretender, as the rightful King of England upon the death of his father, James II. This direct challenge to William III's legitimacy united the English Parliament behind the war effort, despite previous reluctance to engage in continental conflicts. The first military movements began in northern Italy, where imperial forces under Prince Eugene of Savoy crossed into Spanish-controlled territories in spring 1701. France responded by sending troops to support their Spanish allies, and the conflict gradually escalated. However, the war's full outbreak came in 1702, following William III's death and the accession of Queen Anne to the English throne. The opening phases of hostilities revealed the conflict's global nature. While armies maneuvered in Italy and the Low Countries, naval forces prepared for warfare in the Mediterranean and the Americas. The English seized strategic positions in the Caribbean, while Anglo-Dutch fleets threatened Spanish coastal cities. The war would eventually spread across 4 continents, making it one of the first truly global conflicts in history. The stakes were enormous. Beyond the question of the Spanish succession, the war would determine the balance of power in Europe for generations to come. France, at the height of its power under Louis XIV, faced a coalition of unprecedented size and determination. The Spanish Empire, still vast but declining, became the prize over which Europe's greatest powers would battle for the next 13 years. Louis XIV's acceptance of Charles II will remain one of history's great turning points. His decision, driven by dynastic ambition and a belief in French military supremacy, transformed a diplomatic crisis into a devastating war. The conflict would test the limits of French power, reshape the European state system, and establish new principles of international relations that would influence diplomacy for centuries to come. As armies mobilized across Europe in 1702, few could have predicted the war's duration or its far-reaching consequences. The Spanish succession crisis had evolved from a question of inheritance into a struggle that would define the 18th century's political landscape. The first shots had been fired in what would become known as the War of the Spanish Succession, a conflict that would reshape Europe through 13 years of battles, sieges, and diplomatic maneuvering. Surprising, isn't it? But this is just the beginning. Leave your opinion in the comments. Do you think Louis XIV should have accepted the will? Take the opportunity to leave your like and subscribe to Modern Age Chronicles. The War of the Spanish Succession transformed European warfare through a series of monumental battles that showcased both military innovation and strategic brilliance. The conflict scale was unprecedented, with armies numbering over 100,000 men clashing across multiple theaters of war, from the Low Countries to the Mediterranean. The Duke of Marlborough and Prince Eugene of Savoy emerged as the war's most brilliant commanders, their partnership producing some of military history's most decisive victories. The Battle of Blenheim in 1704 marked a turning point, shattering the myth of French invincibility. In this masterpiece of military coordination, Marlborough's forces marched 250 miles across Germany in complete secrecy, catching the Franco-Bavarian army by surprise. The battle resulted in over 30,000 French and Bavarian casualties, marking the first major defeat of Louis XIV's armies in open battle in 40 years. The war witnessed significant military innovations. The flintlock musket, equipped with the socket bayonet, revolutionized infantry combat. This innovation allowed soldiers to both fire and use their weapons as spears without changing equipment, leading to new tactical formations. The standardization of uniforms and equipment also emerged during this period, laying the groundwork for modern military organization. Artillery saw dramatic improvements in mobility and accuracy. The French development of the cannon à la Suédoise, a lighter and more maneuverable field gun, changed battlefield tactics. These guns could be rapidly repositioned during battle, providing crucial fire support where needed most. The war also saw the first widespread use of indirect artillery fire, with guns firing over obstacles to hit unseen targets. British naval strategy proved decisive in the conflict. The Royal Navy's growing power was demonstrated at the Battle of Vigo Bay in 1702, where Anglo-Dutch forces destroyed the Spanish Silver Fleet and its French escort. The capture of Gibraltar in 1704 provided Britain with a strategic Mediterranean base that it holds to this day. The Navy's ability to project power and support land operations through amphibious warfare became a model for future conflicts. Naval innovation included the development of the ship of the line as the backbone of fleet operations. The standardization of ship designs and the implementation of the permanent fighting instructions improved fleet coordination and combat effectiveness. The British also pioneered new logistics systems, establishing a network of overseas bases and supply points that would later support their global empire. The war saw several crucial turning points. The Battle of Ramillies in 1706 secured Allied control of the Spanish Netherlands in a single day. Marlborough's masterful use of cavalry and deception resulted in the collapse of French power in the region. The Battle of Turin in the same year, led by Prince Eugene, drove French forces from Italy and secured the Habsburg position in the peninsula. However, the war's complexity led to unexpected developments. The death of Emperor Joseph I in 1711 dramatically changed the diplomatic landscape. His successor was Archduke Charles, the Habsburg claimant to the Spanish throne. Suddenly, the prospect of reuniting the Habsburg Empire under one ruler seemed as threatening as French dominion over Spain had been earlier. Political changes in Britain also affected the war's course. The fall of the Whig government and the rise of the Tories in 1710 led to secret peace negotiations with France. Marlborough's dismissal in 1711 marked the beginning of Britain's withdrawal from the conflict, despite earlier military successes. The Battle of Denain in 1712 proved to be the war's last major engagement, where Marshal Villars secured a crucial victory for France, helping to salvage French negotiating position in the peace talks. This battle demonstrated how even at the war's end, tactical innovation continued, with Villars using rapid marching and careful timing to achieve surprise. The war also saw the first large-scale use of light cavalry for reconnaissance and raiding, particularly by Hungarian hussars in imperial service. This development would influence cavalry tactics for the next 2 centuries. Similarly, the war saw advances in siege warfare, with the French engineer Vauban's systems of fortification and attack reaching their apex. One of the most significant innovations was in military logistics. The scale of armies required new systems for supply and administration. Magazine systems, where supplies were stockpiled along planned routes of march, became standard practice. This development allowed armies to operate far from their home bases while maintaining fighting effectiveness. The conflict's global nature necessitated new approaches to colonial warfare. In North America, French and British forces adapted European tactics to frontier conditions, developing new forms of irregular warfare. These experiences would influence colonial conflicts for generations to come. By the war's end in 1714, military science had been transformed. The conflict had demonstrated the importance of coalition warfare, the need for sophisticated logistics, and the crucial role of naval power in European conflicts. These lessons would shape military thinking well into the modern era, while the war's diplomatic resolution would establish principles of international relations that would govern European politics for centuries to come. The Treaty of Utrecht in 1713-14 marked a watershed moment in European history, fundamentally reshaping the continent's political landscape. Through a series of bilateral agreements, this complex diplomatic settlement brought an end to the War of Spanish Succession and established principles that would govern international relations for centuries to come. The treaty's most immediate consequence was the recognition of Philip V as King of Spain, but with a crucial stipulation. He and his descendants were required to renounce all claims to the French throne, permanently separating the Spanish and French crowns. This compromise addressed the central fear that had sparked the war, the prospect of a united Bourbon superstate dominating Europe. Spain's territorial losses were substantial. The Spanish Netherlands, Naples, Milan, and Sardinia were transferred to Austrian control, while Sicily went to the Duke of Savoy. Great Britain secured Gibraltar and Minorca, gaining strategic control over the Mediterranean. In the Americas, Britain obtained Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and trading rights in Spanish territories. These territorial changes marked the end of Spain as the dominant European power and the beginning of its long decline. The rise of Great Britain as Europe's predominant naval and commercial power was perhaps the treaty's most lasting consequence. British acquisition of Gibraltar, which remains British territory today, provided control over access to the Mediterranean. The Asiento Contract, granting Britain exclusive rights to supply slaves to Spanish America, significantly enhanced British commercial power. These gains, combined with new trading privileges in Spanish America, laid the foundation for British naval supremacy and colonial expansion. The Austrian Habsburgs, while failing to secure the Spanish throne, emerged with significant territorial gains. Their acquisition of the Spanish Netherlands, modern Belgium, Naples, and Milan expanded Habsburg influence in Western Europe and Italy. However, these gains also created new strategic challenges, as maintaining control over such dispersed territories would prove increasingly difficult. France, despite maintaining its territorial integrity and securing the Spanish throne for the Bourbons, emerged from the war financially exhausted. The conflict marked the end of Louis XIV's expansionist ambitions and the beginning of a period of relative French decline. The war's enormous cost contributed to the financial crisis that would later help trigger the French Revolution. Spain's transformation was profound. The loss of its European territories actually helped Spain focus on internal reforms and colonial administration. Under Bourbon rule, Spain underwent a period of modernization, though it would never regain its former status as Europe's dominant power. The loss of its European possessions marked Spain's transition from a global empire to a more focused colonial power centered on its American territories. The treaty established the principle of balance of power as a cornerstone of international relations. European diplomacy would henceforth focus on preventing any single nation from becoming too powerful, a principle that would influence international relations well into the modern era. This system of checks and balances would be reinforced and refined at subsequent peace conferences, notably the Congress of Vienna in 1815. If Charles II had chosen the Austrian candidate, Europe's development might have taken a dramatically different course. A Habsburg victory could have led to the reconstruction of Charles V's empire, uniting Spain, Austria, and their respective territories under a single crown. This might have contained French power, but could have created an equally dangerous concentration of Habsburg authority. Britain might not have emerged as the dominant naval power, potentially altering the course of colonial expansion and the Industrial Revolution. The war's financial impact reverberated across Europe. Britain's successful management of war debt through innovative financial instruments helped establish London as Europe's financial center. In contrast, France's inability to reform its financial system contributed to its 18th century decline. Spain's loss of European territories, while initially devastating, forced a beneficial reorganization of its empire and administration. The conflict's outcome also influenced cultural and intellectual developments. The principle of balance of power inspired Enlightenment thinkers in their theories of international relations. The war's global nature contributed to an increasingly interconnected European perspective, influencing art, literature, and philosophy during the Enlightenment. These consequences continue to influence modern Europe. The principle of preventing any single power from dominating the continent remains central to European politics. Modern European integration can be seen as an attempt to permanently resolve the kinds of conflicts that sparked the War of Spanish Succession. The war's settlement established patterns of international relations and diplomatic practice that, though evolved, remain relevant in today's interconnected world. Let us engage in a fascinating historical thought experiment. What if Charles II had chosen Archduke Charles as his heir? This decision would have dramatically altered the course of European history. The Habsburg dynasty would have maintained control over both Austria and Spain, potentially recreating an empire reminiscent of Charles V's vast domains. This massive Habsburg realm might have successfully contained French ambitions, but it would have created its own set of challenges. In this alternate timeline, Britain might never have emerged as the dominant naval power. Without gaining Gibraltar and key trading privileges through the Treaty of Utrecht, British naval supremacy might have developed differently or not at all. The Industrial Revolution might have first taken root in a different European nation, perhaps in a Habsburg-dominated Low Countries. Colonial history would have followed a radically different path. A united Habsburg Empire would have possessed both Spanish America and the resources of Central Europe, potentially maintaining control over its colonies far longer. The independence movements in Latin America might have been delayed or taken entirely different forms. The Spanish Empire might have evolved into a modern global superpower, rather than experiencing its historical decline. The legacy of the actual succession war profoundly influenced European royal dynasties. The separation of the French and Spanish Bourbon lines created a complex web of relationships that would influence European politics for centuries. The marriage policies of European royal houses became increasingly focused on maintaining the balance of power, rather than accumulating territories. The war's impact on colonialism was transformative. Britain's rise as a colonial power, facilitated by gains from the Treaty of Utrecht, set the stage for the expansion of the British Empire. The decline of Spanish power in Europe paradoxically allowed Spain to focus more attention on its American colonies, influencing the development of Latin American society and culture. The concept of balance of power, crystallized during this conflict, became a cornerstone of international relations. This principle influenced diplomatic responses to rising powers throughout history, from Napoleonic France to Germany in both world wars. Modern European integration can be seen as an attempt to permanently resolve the types of conflicts that the balance of power system sought to manage. The war's legacy connects directly to contemporary conflicts and diplomatic challenges. Modern debates about European integration, NATO's role, and relations with Russia often reflect similar concerns about maintaining continental stability and preventing any single power from achieving dominance. The European Union itself represents an attempt to permanently resolve the kinds of rivalries that sparked the War of Spanish Succession. And so, a single signature forever changed the map of Europe. Don't miss our next historical revelations. Hit that bell icon, like this video, and subscribe to Modern Age Chronicles. History is full of secrets waiting to be discovered. Charles II may have been signed over 300 years ago, but its consequences shaped the Europe we know today. Some decisions change not just a kingdom, but the destiny of an entire continent. What do you think would have happened if Charles had chosen differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Want to explore more fascinating moments that changed history forever? Join our growing community of history enthusiasts at Modern Age Chronicles. And don't forget to check out our playlist on Europe's great powers for more incredible stories of ambition, power, and destiny. Remember, history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding how we got to where we are today. See you in our next historical adventure.